Thank you, everyone, for joining me today. Hi, Gina. Thanks for joining me, Gina. Hi, Bernie, Antonio, Carol. Thanks for joining. Sheila, Bailey, Lisa. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining me today. I'll just wait a little while while everyone comes in. Thanks, Beauty Gold. Thanks for joining me here today. Um, yeah, so I thought I'd do it. Hi, yeah. Good evening, Bernie. I'm not sure where are you, Bernie? Are you obviously? You're obviously in America. So, um, hi, Georgine. In Australia right now. So I'm in Brisbane, Australia. So right now it's actually what time is it? It's midday. It's 12 o'clock. Maryland. Fantastic. Yeah, beautiful spot. Never been, but I've heard it's nice. Yeah, yeah. Hi, Beauty Gold. Yeah, I'm assuming everyone's mostly from America. Hi, T. Nice to see you again. T's been on here many times before. Um, but I thought I'd thank you so much for joining. I thought I'd talk about a little bit about Putin today and the whole, you know, Donald Trump going to the whole thing. How are you doing, Dee? I'm doing well, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Very well. It's midday here in Australia, so so it's very sort of cold today. There's lots of rain, all that sort of stuff. A little bit concerned for America at the moment, being an Australian who obviously talks a lot about American politics. It is always a concern when I see it because, as your people who follow me know, I do love America, especially Americans. Good evening or good evening to all. Hi T, nice to see you again. It is concerning as an Australian who loves everything, a lot of things about America, but I don't love a lot of things about MAGA America. So the interesting thing is when people come on here and we talk, and I'm mostly talking to Americans, is that I always want to let you know that I think as Australians we really, although sometimes we make fun of America and things like that, but it's not actually at the people, it's at Trump. And I know, hi Dave from California, and I know you guys get that because you guys also make fun of Trump for being an idiot, and you're also as concerned as we are in Australia about what Donald Trump is doing. So I think like one of the things that when I was watching Trump in Russia is how much hi Dave, hi Joe, I mean hi Dave from California, is how much is how much that he actually, I do actually think that Putin thinks he has a good, that's what the laugh half, he has a good relationship with Putin. Um, yeah, it is pretty concerning over there, T. And I do believe he does think he has a good relationship with Putin. He was caught on the hot mic, right? Talking to Emmanuel Macron from France, and he basically said something like, I do think I'm going to get a deal because I think Putin wants to do it for me. So basically, basically what he's saying to Emmanuel Macron, and I wish I could have seen, because when you see the video and you see the hot mic, Macron, his back is facing towards the camera, but I would have loved to see Macron when he said that, because basically what Trump is saying is that they have such a good relationship, Putin and himself. And hi, Bob, thanks for joining. That he's basically going to do a deal. He's going to do a deal for, and this is his words, Trump's words, for me, right? So generally speaking, so Trump is so delusional that he actually thinks that because him and Putin get along socially well, right? That Putin, who's a murderous dictator, right? Who's basically killed so many people, like killed like hundreds of thousands of people, including young people who he made serve for him, right? North Koreans. I mean, a lot of people don't know that he's actually bringing over North Koreans to fight on his behalf. And I've got to be honest. I feel sympathy because I've heard stories of these North Koreans. They don't want to fight in this war, right? They're being forced to fight in this war, and they're basically being used as cannon fodder, and they're just being killed in the thousands, right? And that's not Ukraine's fault. That's basically North Korea is trying to kill them. They've got to defend themselves. But it's just insane. Like there's something about Russia and Putin where not only do they have um, no sympathy for civilians in Ukraine, where like I think 15,000 civilians have died in Ukraine, but they also don't care about their own people. They don't care about their own young people they're killing. They don't care about the North Korean people they're killing on their behalf. Um, so again, it's like this craziness that's coming from, from the conservative side, MAGA, they have this fascination with Putin and this fascination with Russia, and I think a lot of it comes down to is the culture wars, right? Because Putin constantly always talks about how much he hates work, right? Thanks, Rob, for joining. Thanks, Louise. And he hates work. He always talks about it, and like a lot of people in America probably don't hear him saying it, but he spends a lot of time talking about how much he hates woke. He's got quite strong views on the LGBTQ community, right? Um, so a lot of these things. He's also a Christian nationalist, right? So a lot of these people in the sort of the MAGA movement who are very anti-woke, and these people include people like J.D. Vance, Trump, Tucker Carlson. I don't know if you remember, but Tucker Carlson did that propaganda video where he went to Russia and he basically was like spent like 20 minutes talking about how great their shopping trolleys were. It was like the most hilarious thing I've ever seen in my life. Then he goes to the local shopping center in Moscow and he talks about how great the food is there and how cheap it is, right? How it only costs a couple of $100, whatever. What he doesn't tell you is the average salary that the average Russian which is a lot less than what the average American or the average Australian or the average European is on. So he left out a lot of crucial information. I've been to Moscow myself years ago, and I can tell you the train stations, even though the train stations do look beautiful, they were created under Stalin, and the people who worked on those things, a lot of them died, so they weren't created under very good conditions. But I will tell you, as you come out of the train station in Moscow, in the Potemkin supermarket where only rich people. Yeah, exactly, Rob. Exactly. He went to an upmarket restaurant. I know that. I know those. I know those supermarkets. That's like a supermarket for the rich people. The other supermarkets where the average Russian goes, it's crowded in there, right? It's very crowded in there. Um, so, Tucker Carlson, again, is just, I feel like, and this is the thing with Tucker Carlson, I'll go back to Russia a bit, is I feel because like some of the stuff that he's saying about Israel, Palestine, that some people on the left are getting caught up and thinking that, somehow he's like now, a good guy or whatever, saying the right thing. He's basically just a grifter. Yeah. You could not get away with anybody. And it shocks me to see like so many people falling for the whole Tucker Carlson grift. He doesn't care about what's happening in Israel or Palestine. He's basically just trying to establish himself as a third party, like a third. I think Tucker Carlson, in my opinion, is going to run at the next election. I really believe that. I think he's going to run because I think because he can run as some on the left are so gullible, eye roll, but it comes from a good place. Yeah, I do agree, Rob. Like, I know that a lot of people on the left who are falling for Tucker Carlson, right? I don't think there's that many, but there's some, especially in the media, especially like sort of more the progressive side of the thing. They When he says things about Israel and Palestine, look, if that's kind of like a big focus of what you think about, then obviously you want someone with that massive platform saying that can be a positive thing for your side. So I totally understand why people, can somehow be sort of seduced by what he's saying, especially, because it's like, oh, look, it's not just, it's just not the usual progressive saying like Mehdi Hassan or someone like that, or Crystal Ball from Breaking Point. It's actually someone from the right. And from their point of view, they're probably thinking, well, this could help us more because this is someone who who used to support Trump, right? And I think he still supports Trump. So I do think that a lot of this stuff is basically, Tucker Carlson is really, really concerning to me because I think he will try to run the election. I think he's not going to run on I hate Trump, but he is going to run as a kind of a different lane to Trump, and that lane is basically more anti sort of America first. Now, because a lot of people in the Republican Party or the MAGA movement, right? Hi, Harper. Thanks for joining. A lot of people in the MAGA movement, a little bit upset. They're not going to not vote. They wouldn't not vote for Trump again, but they are a little bit upset about Trump's closeness to Israel, all that sort of stuff. Like they feel he's, the Epstein files. The other thing, he wasn't releasing the Epstein files. He was supposed to be the guy who comes in and gets rid of the deep state, right? And yet he came in and he not only did he not stop the wars like he did in 24 hours, like remember he said he was going to stop the wars in 24 hours. The wars got worse in Israel, in Ukraine. He's basically, the things are getting worse. This is the other thing that's interesting, right? Is that like both JD Vance and Trump basically said that, and they're using this as evidence, right? They're saying that Trump said that Putin told him that he wouldn't have invaded Ukraine, right, if Trump was president. It was only because Joe Biden was president, right? So basically, now Trump's been saying that before Putin said that, right? But the idea that we're supposed to believe Putin, for one thing, I don't even know if Putin said that, right? But I wouldn't be surprised if he did say that. And if he did say that, he's only going to say that because he knows that Trump wants to hear that, right? It's like when he told Putin, again, I don't know if he did tell Trump this, but I wouldn't be surprised if he did say this part as well, that mail-in voting. So Putin basically tells Trump, is what Trump says, that mail-in voting is corrupt and the election was stolen from him. Now, this is and Trump goes on TV with a straight face. Oh my God, that was such an ego stroke. Yeah, it was, Rob. And Trump goes on TV with a straight face. And again, this is why I don't understand how like people just don't laugh at this. Goes on TV with a straight face and says, well, Putin told me that my election will stop. He's basically like saying it like this is evidence that it's true, right? From Putin. Putin said to me that, mail-in ballots is like it's stealing the election. And he also said that he wouldn't have invaded if I was president. So there it is, case closed. As I said to you guys all this time, this is exactly what I've been saying. And now Putin has confirmed everything I said. So what have you got? That's it. So like we're supposed to like go, okay, great. Now look, as a Liberal, I now apologize to Donald Trump for, obviously Putin says that this has to be real. Rob C, 90% at least of everything out of this regime is Russian. Yeah, it is. But this is the thing, like, he just says it like I would be like, how is he not embarrassed to be regurgitating what Putin said to him, right? It gets worse because, I mean, Putin in Russia, they don't actually have proper elections. So not only is he being told this by a murderous dictator, right, who just invaded Ukraine a couple of years ago, but he's been told that the elections in America were stolen by someone who doesn't actually hold proper elections and poisons the people who go against him, right, and he kills anybody. Journalists seem to fall out off buildings when they criticize him, right? They have this gravity problem in Russia. It's a real gravity problem. I don't know what's going on over there. And then basically kills his opposition. They don't have proper elections, right? And this is the person that Trump is holding up as the person to say, look, he agrees with me. That's like the opposite. Like if I was an American president, right, and someone like him told me like that, like someone who doesn't have proper elections said that to me, I wouldn't go on TV and advertise that. I'd be like, I'll keep that to myself because I wouldn't think that was, a lot of credibility there coming from someone like Putin, right? And again, with the whole mailing vote, again, and the other thing is Putin said to him, that he wouldn't invade, right? So Trump has always been saying this for a while, basically saying that Biden was so weak, right, that Putin wouldn't have invaded Ukraine because he would have been too scared, right? Now, here's a problem with that logic, right? Because when Trump got into power, the Russia actually increased, right? their attacks on the Ukraine by a significant amount and have ever since. So if what he's saying is true, that Putin would have been too scared, right? Too scared to actually, you know, to attack. Then why are they increasing their attacks on Ukraine since he got power? That's because they think they can get away with more with Trump than they did with Biden. So the opposite is actually true, right? Because if that was true, then Putin, when he was elected, would have pulled back. Would go, I don't want to upset, Trump, so I won't. But he said they did the opposite, right? So again, it just doesn't make any sense. But in the MAGA world, right, that makes a lot of sense. And especially when you have people like JD Vance and all those people, who are basically JD Vance went on TV as well, so, and basically said the same thing about, he basically was interviewed, I think it was today, on Fox News, of course. They don't go anywhere else but Fox. They just generally go on Fox News these days. I mean, basically Fox News has become the propaganda arm of the MAGA movement. They're not even trying to hide it anymore. Like, at least in the old days, Fox News would try, and the Republican Party would try to pretend like there was like a separation. But now it's like, nah, they're basically us, and by the way, if you want to get a job in the administration, you just get a job at Fox News, and eventually you'll end up in cabinet. But JD Vance went on Fox News. He was interviewed today, right? And he basically said, people don't know this about Putin, but he's actually quite softly spoken. Yeah. And people don't know, they don't understand him. You know what I mean? And the first thing that came to my mind was kind of the way he said it was almost like he had like a little bit of a crush on Putin. Like, he does. JD Vance says a lot of creepy things. I don't know if you remember, like, one time he posted something about that we must all abide by Trump's desires, and he actually used the word. He actually used the word desires, Trump's desires. It's like very creepy the way he talks. Like, I thought Vance was smarter than that. Yeah, I don't see. I think Vance is smarter, but in terms of academic smart, but I don't think he's smart in terms of like as much as like political is. Because again, like if you remember during the election, he was having a lot of awkward moments when he was talking to the public. Yes, softly spoken like a snake. JD's a creep. Saying, yeah, Joyce, I think Vance will be worse. Joyce, I 100% agree with you. I actually think JD Vance is worse than Trump. No, I have for a long time, and the reason is because he will get a lot of he, even though I think he's very awkward when he's around like normal people, he will be able to create a veneer around him, right? That he is more normal than Trump, and a lot of the big tech billionaires, they love him. The big, like Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, all these people, they love him. So he will basically get a lot of the control through that sort of side of it. I do think he's obviously smarter. He's not going to do the thing with Trump is he says so many stupid stuff, and he gets away with saying stupid stuff. Yeah, he's Peter Thiel guy, 100%. Yeah, and he gets away with saying a lot of that stupid stuff. But I think JD Vance is, without the crazy stuff that like the things that Trump does, he's going to come across as more conventional. And from that side of it, he won't come across as crazy, and I think he'll get away with it. I think he's also, they love him because he's a cipher. They know they can project anything upon. Yeah. I mean, he's basically he comes from that world of big tech billionaires, but he also comes from that world in the MAGA movement where they despise Zelensky, right? And they have a affinity they like Putin, right? And they like him because if you look at JD Vance, a lot of what he talks about is the culture wars, right? He is obsessed with woke stuff, which is quite unusual because when you see pictures of JD Vance when he was young, he was like this alternative kid, right? Who was like weird, like someone that people who are anti-woke would have made fun of. A lot of the anti-woke people would have made fun of JD Vance when he was a kid, right? Like when you see those pictures, right? So it's weird. Like it's almost like he was the kid that was bullied at school, and now he wants to be part of the cool group who now bullies the other people that were like JD Vance when he was younger, right? He's like, but he has this thing where he really there is part of the MAGA movement. Yeah, he called Trump a Nazi. Yeah, I mean the best thing JD Vance ever said was when he said Trump is America's Hitler. Um, and yeah, so I think there's a bit of a thing where he said JD Vance wants to be this cool kid. There is certainly um, part of the MAGA movement that doesn't like JD Vance, and that's the part that didn't like Vivek Ramaswamy as well. And that's kind of like the white nationalist part of the group, right? Because they don't like the fact that JD Vance is married to an Indian. He's turned to be the bully. Got it. Yeah, yeah, I agree. I agree. I mean, if you look, I mean, basically, he is. He's that kid. JD Vance is that kid who was a bully, alternative kid, right? He was, who wasn't very cool, and he's now like, well, you know what? I'm now going to hang out with the big boys, and I get that a little bit from the big tech billionaires as well. A lot of those people would have been nerds at school, right? And now they've got all this power. So it kind of goes together the fact that someone like JD Vance would be friends with Peter Thiel and Elon Musk and all these people in this world because they all kind of were nerds in school and then now they're kind of the in crowd, right? So again, they've got, he's got a totally Peter Thiel is like that as well. Yeah, they all are. They're all this group. They're not really the type of people, and that's why a lot of the people online are currently trolling um, Trump and JD Vance as Revenge of the Nerds. Rob, I remember seeing Revenge of the Nerds in the 80s when I was like way too young to be watching that movie. Like I think I was like very young. But yeah, Revenge of the Nerds, it basically is like, yeah. Um, but yeah, I mean, exactly. And I think when we see the way these people are getting power, even someone like Mark Zuckerberg, who was never like a big MAGA person, um, Rob Sales already in had yeah. Yeah, it does remind actually, I can't stop thinking of Revenge of the Nerds now. They're totally those billionaires are totally those guys. And hey, good on them. I think it's good that we celebrate people who are smart, right? Instead of people who are just really good at sports. I think that's actually a positive thing. It's just a shame that these people have become such sort of right wing people, in a sense, like, in that way. Zuckerberg he is a dork, yeah. And I remember, I actually think that on a personal basis, I actually think Zuckerberg is the most annoying out of all of them. And the reason I think that is because the other people, right, Peter Thiel and all of these people, they always kind of show that right wing side of them. Um, yeah, they've gone overboard. Yeah, they've always shown that sort of yeah, just be sure they've gone overboard in terms of needing their maximum amount of power. Yeah, I feel like Zuckerberg is worse because Zuckerberg was kind of like wasn't a Democrat really, but he was kind of like a liberal type guy, right? And now suddenly, but as soon as the change in the winds, because he has no spine, he will just say and do whatever he thinks is fashionable at the time, right? So, or what is politically viable for him that will be better for him. So, as soon as it looked like Trump was going to win the election, he started pivoting towards Trump, right? And then he did the usual thing was he went on the Joe Rogan experience, which is kind of a way of getting yourself back into the good books of the Trump administration. He then talked about how the Democrats were asking him to censor things about the COVID thing. Of course, that's the kind of thing that Joe Rogan loves to talk about, censorship during COVID, right? So basically Zuckerberg, got in with the MAGA movement that way through Joe Rogan and all that sort of stuff, and then basically ingratiating himself back into the MAGA movement. Then, of course, even though Trump actually threatened Zuckerberg with jail, he basically said Zuckerberg should be in jail. Rogan needs to be distancing himself from Trump. Yeah, he is now, Rob. He is now. But the thing about it is that I still watch a little bit of Joe Rogan. I can't watch as much as I used to. I did watch a lot back in the day, but now I just find it annoying. But I watch enough about it. Is that when he's when he does go after Trump, it's also important to say that he's not becoming a Democrat, right? And he's not becoming. He might he might consider endorsing a Democrat if it was someone like Bernie Sanders, not even Bernie, not these days Bernie, but it was someone who was like a populist left wing person, right? Um, he's certainly. I still think that Rogan would still be more sympathetic, right, towards the Republican MAGA movement than he would be towards the Democrats. And if you watch his stuff, like a lot of stuff online gets shared about Rogan, gets shared about how he goes after Trump. But if you actually watch him, he's still criticizing the Democrats a lot. Like, I mean, he still thinks they're worse, right? So a little bit of context there in terms of I don't think that these people in that area are going to become Democrats. Even if like I think they're the kind of people who would vote for like a libertarian person, right? Someone like that. I think that's kind of what they're into there, and they are very libertarian, that group. Pete Buttigieg has done quite well in the last couple of months by going a lot of those shows. He's not Joe Rogan, but he went a lot of those orbit shows that are around him, and he does really well. And I think, I've said this before, I think that's something that they're so butthurt about woke. It's true. Yeah, this is the thing, Rob. They're so obsessed with woke, right? The podcasters, um, people like Bill Maher, this world, right? They're so obsessed with woke that they won't go back to Democrats unless it's someone who like comes out and says, I was wrong about woke. I can't believe I did woke stuff. I felt, it'd have to be like that, someone like that in the Democrats. It couldn't be someone who was just like, oh, well, I'm concentrating. So, and in a way, I can understand how initially they got into that because I think with things like cancel culture, they were looking at um, because they're comedians. Well, I don't think Joe Rogan's that funny, but anyway, to each their own. But I think that I think people like that, Bill Maher, Joe Rogan, a lot of people who live in that space, they're like comedians. It became a big issue for them because that was the industry that was affected the most in terms of pushback, because obviously saying jokes and people come back and stuff like that. So, but what they don't understand is that might have been, haha, true. Rogan's not funny. Wait, Mars is, yeah. They're not. I don't think they're that funny at all. I mean, I don't mind Dave Chappelle. I think Dave Chappelle's quite funny. He's kind of in that group as well. I don't hate everyone in that group, but I think some of them are a bit funny. Shane Gillies, I think, does a really good Trump impression. He's kind of in that world as well. But again, I think they got obsessed with that they got obsessed with it because that's the world that culture, that cancel culture affected. The comedians, right? Because they're the ones saying stuff. Or Bill Maher on his TV show, right? What? But the problem is they tried to make it out like it's the worst thing in the world. They wanted to make out like this woke thing was literally fascism. And you listen to someone like Piers Morgan, right, who always tries to make himself out to be like, I'm not really a Trump supporter, but he obviously is a Trump supporter, right? But he would say things like woke fascism, right? He would call it woke fascism. And that they did, they call it fascism. It's interesting because people like Piers Morgan or Joe Rogan, a lot of these people, or Bill Maher, they would criticize people for calling Trump a fascist, or he says fascist things, right? Right. But they're willing to, but and they would criticize those people because they would say is that, well, you can't use that word, right, because it's too extreme and things like that. Well, calling something woke fascism, like that's about as extreme as you can get. I mean, what are we talking about here? In a lot of cases, we're talking about left wing people online getting upset about something. We're not talking about the government. We're not talking top down. We're talking about some people online who got a little bit too sensitive, right? So again, I think a lot of this stuff was completely overblown. Even if there was a tiny bit of truth that there maybe was a bit of sensitivity, I think the biggest issue around woke, right, was that everyone now has a platform to give their opinion, right? In the old days, when I was growing up, maybe a lot of people here were growing up, if you're watching a TV show, right, and you don't like what you're seeing and you're offended by that TV show, right? In the old days, you would have to go, I've got to find exactly, Joe. Woke has never been legislated. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's like in the old days, it'd be like, okay, I'm offended by that. So I've got to go find myself a piece of paper. I've got to go find myself a pen, right? And then tomorrow I'm going to have to go to the post office and deliver it. Right? nobody. Some people did, but very few people would do that, right? It's too much. It's too much effort. Now, if you're watching something, right, and you're offended by it, you can just your phone. You're probably watching it on your phone, and then you just go on Twitter or whatever and go, "I don't like this. I'm offended." Boom, 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 and it's so easy. So it's not that people have become necessarily more sensitive or more that, although probably as generations go, we find things more offensive than we did before. So there's definitely some part of that. But a lot of it is just technology. It's just the fact that everyone now can give their opinion straight away instead of writing a letter, go to the post office because no one was going to do that. So again, they're confusing this Joe Rogan or that they're confusing the left wing suddenly becoming super sensitive about everything. They're confusing that with right. They're confusing that with technology where everyone can now just give their opinion, right? And that can happen from and the other thing they miss out as well is that so many people on the right do the same thing, right? I mean, think about this, right? It's the person who all these people, Joe Rogan, the anti-woke people, the anti-culture culture, who did they vote for? They voted for Trump, right? And partly they voted for Trump because they thought he was the free speech candidate, right? Which is hilarious, right? Um, but Trump sued Bill Maher, right, the comedian, over a joke. He literally sued Bill Maher over a joke because Bill Maher made a joke about his family being orangutans. Right? So and he didn't just threaten to sue Bill Maher. It's Rob C. It's so weird how many people think that the opinion needs to be broadcast immediately, mind-boggling level of self-regard. Yeah, yeah. And so the person that this whole MAGA movement look up to for free speech is the guy who couldn't even take a joke, right? He couldn't even take a joke, and that's Trump. And Trump tries to sue everybody, right? He sues the media to try to close down what they're saying, right? He tries to sue, he sues people who say things badly against him, whether online or whether, even though he's called people pedophiles and all that. So again, it's just the hypocrisy there is insane. And also, sue babies. Yeah, exactly. And he always sues, right? He always goes through his stage of when he wants to sue people when he's president. Because as a president, it's much harder to sue, right? He became way more litigious when he became president. He was always litigious, but he became way more litigious when he had the protection of being a president, right? And it's much easier. So again, and the other thing they got really sensitive about was how, Taylor Swift endorsed, right? So Taylor Swift endorses Trump, right? And they lose their minds. One a trans woman gets a Bud Light beer and they went nuts, right? So again, I think a lot of the snowflakes are actually on the right, not the left. I'm sure there's both, right? But a lot of it is mostly on the right. And on the right, it's actually coming from the top down. We, the people, need to sue Trump. Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, the other thing that's been happening recently is Gavin Newsom trolling Donald Trump, which has been hilarious to watch. And the reason it's so funny is because Fox News are losing their minds over Gavin Newsom. Now, obviously, I don't think it's Gavin Newsom who's actually. I think there's other people he has in control of these particular accounts who are doing all the trolling, and I think I've seen some of them that are a bit younger and that sort of thing, but they're very good. And whoever they are, they deserve a pay rise. The funniest part is the right not understanding that it's trolling. Yeah, that's exactly right, Rob. That's what I was about to say. That's the most hilarious part of it, right? Um, because you had Dana Perino, I think her name is, on Fox News, say that Gavin Newsom should take a hard look at himself, right? Gavin Newsom should really, really take a hard look at himself. He's embarrassing himself by tweeting like this, right? It's immature. And if I was his wife, I'd tell him to stop. And also, if Gavin Newsom wants to become president one day, this is very unpresidential. Like, the lack of self-awareness here is insane. Like, what is she saying here? Like, this is just so crazy. Like, I want to believe as a human being that someone in a position like this person on Fox News, right, can say something like, not just her, but a whole bunch of them are saying this sort of stuff in the MAGA movement, criticizing um, Gavin Newsom, who's obviously taking the piss, right? He's mimicking, he's copying, right, Trump to put a mirror up to the MAGA movement to say, this is how stupid it sounds when people do this, right? And they don't even get it. It's gone right over their head. Um, some people, it's just insane that these people don't even understand when they're being made fun of. And again, I think so many of these people are basically um, don't have a sense of humor. They're not smart enough to see what's going on, and it's just hilarious to watch. And it's actually working. That's the Newsom social media director. Yeah. Oh, Camilla Zapata. Right. Okay. I got you. Yep. Yep. Okay. Yes. And I think I know. Is she actually? Does she have like a Mexican heritage or something? I think she might actually. Yeah. I think I saw like a TikTok video about her. She's kind of youngish, coolish. She looked pretty cool. Yeah. But yeah, they need to keep doing this. They really need to keep doing. It's hilarious. And look, the other part is that this is what gets. Yeah, she's Gen Z with a Hispanic heritage. Yeah. Yeah. Latina. Yeah. Um, it's just like it's insane that in 20 or when you think about this, right? When in 2025, that this is what it takes to get attention from people, right? It's kind of like funny but sad at the same time that the number one thing that the Democrats are doing to get attention is to just mimic Trump and troll like that. Like it's kind of like it's funny, but it's also sad that we have to do this, right? To get attention from people because this is just the new landscape. This is the new landscape we live in. Like Zoran Mandami understood this new landscape, right? Whether you like his policies or not, he understood how to use it. And Democrats need to learn how to use this landscape as well. And obviously, um, it's so sad, but we have to do it to get ahead in this environment. Yeah, I agree, Rob. I do. Like, it's the same thing with the gerrymandering thing, right? On the one hand, I'm like, yeah, Gavin Newsom has to fight fire with fire. We have to cope with this somehow, LOL. Yeah, Nick Crespo, I think 100%. Um, we have to fight fire with fire, right? And that's the thing. And what Gavin Newsom is doing with his social media account and the gerrymandering, I don't disagree with, but at the same time, I'm like, it's a shame we have to do this, right? Because gerrymandering is not a good thing no matter who does it. And I get that Republicans do it way worse. And I get that in California, they actually do have an independent commission. But the fact that we have to go, or Democrats have to go down that fast, it's sad that they have to do it. Yeah. And it's a shame because it's like Republicans are forcing Democrats to get their hands dirty when they really shouldn't have to do that, right? But I think as long as the Democrats, I think as long as the Democrats make it make a point of the fact that what Gavin Newsom is doing online is just trolling to hold a mirror up to these people, right? And that in terms of gerrymandering, they're not saying they want to do this as a permanent thing. They want to do this just as a way to even it up, right? And then in the future, they want to bring in, which I think the Democrats have already said this. They want to bring in a policy to bring in independent commission, right, to draw up the maps like we have in Australia. In Australia, right, you can't if you're like Labor, the Labor Party in Australia is like centre left, right, and the LNP is like the centre right. In Australia, we have the same thing where you get people coming from overseas or different demographics or different areas. People move into different areas and new areas that getting built, and then you have to redraw the maps, right? And it happens in all countries, right? But the difference is in Australia is both sides of politics, both sides, not just one, agree that we need to have an independent commission to make those decisions, right? Not just one side politics. The idea. Hi, Melissa. Thanks for joining, Melissa. The idea that you would have, right, in a country like the United States, a very powerful country, a country that sort of was a beacon of democracy, and this country is basically we're creating a situation where they're trying to redraw maps to make to so one side of politics can get more votes. It's just as an Australian to watch this is just insane to me. Absolutely insane to me to watch this, and it's so sad because a lot of countries like Australia or Europe would look to America as the beacon of democracy, right? One of the first democracies in the world, and yet now you're having a position where you can't even have independent commissions draw up these maps. And that just seems crazy to me. Like, I don't understand why you wouldn't do it. One of the arguments I've heard from Republicans, right, who generally are against independent commissions, is that somehow the independent commission will become, corrupt and all that sort of stuff. And that's why we should have, the person, right, who wins the election should be able to control the maps. It's just, it's just it doesn't make any sense. There's no other Western country, right, has people who win politics or one side of politics drawing up maps. Again, every Western country, including Australia, has to draw up maps as the population increases. We get more people from overseas, all that sort of stuff. So this is not unique to the United States. What is unique to the United States is where you can draw these insane little maps. So it just picks up these little gerrymandered, insane little maps that just pick up your constituents, right? And I'll never understand that, Rob. See, nonpartisan commissions are woke, don't you know? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But this is the thing, right? If you hate government enough, like I think the problem with some people on the right, and I include like libertarians, some libertarians in this, is that if you demonize government enough, it's easier then to say this, right? If you say no government can be trusted, no government is good, right? Then a symptom of that, or a thing that's going to happen on the side, is that one side of Parliament, Texas will be voting tomorrow, and the new maps are crazy. Yeah, I've seen the maps; they're just like literally they don't make any sense at all until you see the little red dots where all the Republicans are, and that makes a lot of sense. A lot of sense. But again, this sort of thing where you don't trust government or you hate government, then it's easier to say, well, you know what, we can't trust Democrats and we can't trust Republican, we can't trust independent commissions, right? Because they're bureaucrats, right? And bureaucrats they don't get voted in. And that's the whole thing of the whole Republican Party under the MAGA movement, right? It's basically saying, we saw that with Doge, right? We can't trust bureaucrats. It was a story that MAGA and Trump have been telling the whole way away. We can't trust bureaucrats, so we need to fire bureaucrats, right? They are the deep state. They're the deep state, right? So they got demonized for so long. And the people who draw up those maps are now included as part of the deep state or the bureaucrats. They can't be trusted. So in a way, MAGA and Trump have kind of immunized themselves from getting to this position, although I don't think it's working in their favor. I still think that that's the thing of, if we hate government, we hate bureaucrats, we hate this, they can get away with this. And it's basically getting rid of bureaucrats or getting rid of these people is a way to stop any guardrails from being there. It turns out Trump is a deep state. Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think the interesting thing about the Epstein files is that the whole MAGA movement, the reason the MAGA movement was so obsessed about the Epstein files was because they thought it was going to expose the deep state. And of course, the only deep state that the MAGA movement and Trump wanted to expose was liberals or Democrats. The amount of times I saw people, Kash Patel, right? People like Kash Patel and Pam Bondi, they weren't spending like 4 years under Biden going on podcasts, Joe Rogan, other podcasts talking about how we have to release the Epstein files. And the reason Biden is not releasing the Epstein files is because they're hiding, right? They're protecting their own people, right? There was no mention of Trump, right? There was no mention of people in the MAGA movement. It was only ever Democrats, people like Bill Clinton or things like that, they're protecting, right? So they based the whole deep state thing, right, on the Epstein files, and that kind of encapsulated the whole Epstein files. Unfortunately for Trump, that was a very awkward thing, right? Because Trump the people around Trump were pushing this. And now Trump did kind of talk a little bit about it, but if you actually go back before the election, Trump was never the biggest advocate for talking about Epstein files. It was always people asking him about it. He never initiated the conversation, right? But because he understands that his base, right? This is something that Trump is good at. Trump does understand his base. I think he's really good at understanding his base. He knew that his base were obsessed with this, so he wanted to throw them some meat, right? So when he'd go on shows, he'd go, well, it's a bit strange how he died, and we want to get to the bottom. But then he changed the subject, right? But of course, when he was interviewed on Fox News last year, and the Fox News reporter said, "Do you want to? Are you going to release the MLK files?" Yes, no hesitation, right? The JFK files, yes, no hesitation. What about the Epstein files? Um, Probably less so with that one. There's a lot of phony accusations in there. So he suddenly was like backtracking. He's good at mimicking his base concerns. Knows, yeah, exactly, Rob. Yeah. So he started sort of backtracking. What's interesting about that interview, right? What's interesting about that interview that he did with Fox News is that after the election, all Trump could talk about was how Kamala Harris did an interview on CBS and they slightly edited the interview, right, where they took out some ums and ahs, which is very normal, right? And they said, well, you know what? That I can't believe, and then Trump sued CBS, and of course they were doing a deal with Skydance, so they gave him money and whatever, right? So he basically got them to pay for him. What's interesting about that is that that interview that Trump did with Fox News was also edited, but it wasn't edited to get rid of ums and ahs. It was edited to get rid of the part where Trump was hesitant about releasing the Epstein files. They literally took that bit out and left in the bit where he said yes at the start and took it out. Now, if you were to look at the two editing things, right? One is Trump editing, Fox News editing out him saying that he's not sure about releasing the Epstein files, and CBS editing out some very slight things that most people wouldn't even notice. Yet Trump said that the the editing of Kamala Harris and CBS is one of the worst things that he's ever seen. One of the biggest scandals on it. It's just hilarious, right? Again, but not he hasn't mentioned anything about him being he was being edited out of, being hesitant about the MC files. When it comes to MAGA, every accusation is a confession. Literally every accusation is a confession when it comes to MAGA. They just, it's amazing that he can get away with that, right? Why simultaneously Fox News, and by the way, Fox News were criticizing CBS for editing, right? Like, again, we, it's the reason people can get away with this is because people live in echo chambers, right? And when people live in echo chambers, they know that the people who are listening to, Donald Trump saying that CBS basically edited it, right? And they shouldn't have edited all that stuff. They're not going to go and hear this story about Fox News editing about Trump and Epstein. They're not going to hear that. They only hear one side of the news, and that's the side where CBS did the editing. They don't hear the other side. I know this because I go on Twitter. I'm on Twitter. I talk to MAGA all the time, all projection. Yeah, yeah. I talk to MAGA all the time on Twitter, and they often will say things to me about CBS, and I'll say, "What about when Fox News did the same thing?" And not one of them knows about it. Not one of them ever says to me, "Oh no," they don't even deny it. They just don't know about that. So, like, what are you talking about? What? You never did that. I showed them the article, and they're like, "Oh, well, I don't know." They don't even know about it. It's one thing to do. It's one thing to go, "Well, it's fake news," but the fact that they're completely oblivious to the actual story says so much about how people, and maybe not even MAGA, live in these kind of echo chambers, which is why I always try to get at myself on Twitter, because there's a lot of MAGA on Twitter, and I don't mind debating them. I don't mind talking to MAGA. I would love for them to come on here and talk to me, But the thing is that I think they get away with it because they know the ecosystem. They also have a better Trump and that also have a better ecosystem. Like they're better online. I think Democrats are getting better now with Gavin Newsom and and all that sort of stuff. But going back to the Epstein thing, I think basically, yeah, it worked against Trump. I think Trump was starting to get a little bit worried when people were becoming obsessed with the Epstein files once he got into power, because people were going on a lot of podcasts. Remember, Trump went on all these podcasts before the election, and he basically used those people, right? He used the people in the podcast world. He lied to them, and he told them things that they wanted to hear, and he told them things they wanted to hear about Epstein, right? So when Trump went on the Joe Rogan Experience, he was like talking about Epstein. Now, he never initiated that conversation. Joe Rogan did. And so when he went on all these other podcasts, which is the sort of manosphere ones, right? And they would always talk to him because a lot of these podcasters, they're obsessed with talking about Trump fosters the hate in his base. He needs that to support. Yeah. And he basically just lied to these people. He manipulated these people. And now these people are starting to see, right, that they were lied to by Trump. That's a big problem for Trump. And I'll tell you why, because these people, they have massive audiences. And the Democrats lost a lot of young people at the last election, which is unusual for Democrats. And they also lost a lot of working class people. And a lot of working class people, a lot of young people, especially more young guys I'm talking about, young men, they went to a lot of people, they get a lot of their information from this podcast world, right? And so do working class people, like, truck drivers will be, in a truck for like the whole day, whatever, and they're listening to Joe Rogan's podcast, which goes for like 4 hours, right? So a lot of these people get a lot of the information from this world, and they're going to lose a lot of these people. Trump will lose a lot of these people because of the Epstein files. So I don't actually think the Epstein files in themselves, it's a big story. For me, it exposes the MAGA movement for being fake, right? It exposes the MAGA movement for coming up with, for not being authentic. And in this day and age, being authentic does win you votes, right? Even if you're authentic like Trump, like where he says just crazy shit, right? Not that I would call it authentic, but you know what I'm saying. Like, he doesn't come across as robotic, right? And so I think a lot of this stuff is going to fall back. Trump, you're already seeing less enthusiasm, right? You're seeing a lot less enthusiasm by young people on Twitter, and you're seeing a lot less enthusiastic by working class people, right? And this is a good opportunity for Democrats to try to grab some of those people and bring them over. But the other thing is, I think a lot of them might not go to the Democrats, but even if they don't vote, they don't have the enthusiasm to vote. That's also a big positive as well, because the less people who vote for Republicans, obviously, the better. The midterms generally is a low turnout, so that could be good for Democrats as well. The problem is, of course, is that they're trying to rig the system by gerrymandering and mailing votes and all this sort of stuff. I don't know how successful that's going to be, but Trump's having problems with his base. I think this is where, because of Trump's problems with his base at the moment, although in saying that, the majority of them aren't going to become Democrats, I think this is setting up a new lane, and it's setting up a new lane for people like Tucker Carlson. And I really do believe that someone like Tucker Carlson is going to come in at the next election, and is going to not come in as anti-MAGA, but come in as different to MAGA, right? As being more pro-America, more America first than Trump was, right? And think about this. There's a couple of things that the base could easily move over to someone new, right? One is the Epstein files. So someone came in and said, I'm definitely going to release the Epstein files, right? And secondly would be Trump's support of Israel, right? So there's votes for someone like Tucker Carlson to bring over to, like, I would say, like a new lane, not a complete new lane, but like sort of a halfway lane. And I think that's what's going to happen, because Trump's basically, if Trump loses the midterms by a significant amount, he's basically a lame duck president, right? Assuming he doesn't change things to the point where, it's going to be hard for Democrats to win, right? Best case scenario, right? So I think in that sense, people are gonna, in the Republican Party or people in the MAGA movement, don't have to rely on him as much as they did in 2024, because he might not be as important back then. Again, this all depends on how his popularity is. I think the economy is going to be the biggest thing that we're going to be talking about. I think Trump cannot win with a bad economy. He can't win with inflation. Here's the thing, like even if it doesn't matter if Trump firing the Labor of Statistics person because he didn't like the numbers, right? Um, it can only work so far because the problem is if you look at the 2024 election, a lot of people were not paying attention to politics like the way we do. They voted based on their everyday experience, like, cost of living, grocery prices, rents, home prices, right? And so it doesn't matter if Trump gets rid of people at the latest statistics. It's not a good thing. I don't think it's a good thing. But if the everyday people who are not following politics every day are still paying more for stuff, they're not going to vote for it, right? Because they're not paying attention to politics. And I think that's how Trump, in some ways, won the election in 2024, is that he was talking about, he was lying. He was lying. He was saying, I'm going to bring down cost of living, blah, blah, blah. There's a problem for incumbent governments, not just for Trump, all around the world. Incumbency post COVID is a big problem because there are more and more people who don't follow politics, especially after COVID, because they got so distracted by other things like TikTok, streaming services, and there is so many distractions now that you don't have to follow politics anymore, and they only listen to politics when something goes viral. So you might be watching a TikTok video, and if something goes viral, you will hear about it even if you don't follow politics because it kind of when something goes viral, it breaks the algorithm. So you could be someone who just likes watching people dance on TikTok, but if something goes viral and it's political, you probably hear about it even if that's not your thing. So Trump was good at getting those eyeballs in 2024 by saying low info and low prompts voters seem to believe everything. Yeah, and look, Rob, you would probably know this as well, is that when they did the post-election results in terms of polling, the people who voted the most for Trump was the people who don't follow politics very often, or they're low information voters, and the people who voted for the Democrats the most were people who follow politics closely. So that makes perfect sense, right? Because you're watching Trump in 2024 show up in court every day, indictment here, indictment there, indictments everywhere, right? And yet his polling slightly went up, right? And that's because most people weren't paying attention, right? They were just hearing things like he's going to bring grocery prices down, he's going to do this, he's going to do that, right? That's all they were hearing. They were hearing the good stuff. So yeah, but it's generally not a good sign, right? When the party, like the MAGA movement, has to try to rig the system by gerrymandering or stopping mailing votes like that to win. It says to me that they don't feel they can win on just telling people, right, that these are our policies, right? You shouldn't have to gerrymander, and you shouldn't have to try to stop mailing votes or stopping people to vote if you feel you have a strong enough case to tell the American people that, hey, vote for me and you'll get all these policies, right? But I don't think MAGA and Trump realize is that what they realize is that things are not going to go well for them, right? In the next couple of years, they're going to go bad for them, and so they're already rigging the system, right, to try to for that to happen, right? And so it says a lot about how they think about their own policies because just give people policies that are better than the Democrats, and you should win elections. That's you would hope, right? That's not always the case, but yeah. So I think that's a really bad thing that in America that I feel like there's a certain sense of people are moving towards authoritarianism, right? I think people don't care about it as much as they should. I think they're willing to look past authority, Trump being authoritarian. And I think they did this in the 2024 elections where they moved past Trump being authoritarian because they thought that he was going to be better for the economy. So I think, it's sad seeing that from Australia that there's not enough people who are, it's also, and I would say it's part of it is they don't think it's the number one issue. Two is I think they're not paying attention. So basically the Democrats can, to get a big enough people to vote for him, they have to get a lot of attention on them. And that's the big thing. Like in the old times, how much money a party had was the biggest thing. Now, of course, you need to have a lot of money to win elections, but it's not the only thing these days. Trying to get attention. Like if you look at Zoran Mandami, he didn't have the most amount of money. If you look at someone like Bloomberg, who runs all the time, for presidency, or he has a couple of times, he has a lot of money, but he never gets past 2% because he doesn't have charisma. He doesn't have, he doesn't know how to use social media, all that sort of stuff. So it's not just about having money these days to win elections. And I think that could be a positive thing for the Democrats. They just need to learn how to use social media better than they did in 2024, where they basically ran like a legacy media campaign where Trump was like running, the Trump administration were running basically like more modern type of campaign. But yeah, and I just hope that Trump and and JD Vance and whoever goes after Trump after this, which I think is probably going to be JD Vance, but I think Tucker will come in, is defeated, because I do think JD Vance is actually worse than Trump. Yeah, in so many ways. Um, and I think if he comes in, if JD Vance was to win, I think he would take it further than Trump did, and I think he'd be more successful at doing it. Because a lot of these people, their relationship or the way they think about Russia, and the way some part of the MAGA movement think about Russia is really disturbing. That they were willing to overlook so many of the horrible things that Putin did because they think, Putin's anti-woke, right? We can't, it's just insane. Like the exaggeration of what woke is, I think needs to be defeated by the Democrats. They need to confront it, right, head on, right? And they need to confront it by saying that it's not the worst thing in the world. It's exaggerated, right, by MAGA. And the people who talk about woke all the time are not the liberals, right? They're not the Democrats. It's the Trump administration. In 2024, the people running ads about woke were the Trump administration. They spent like $120 million talking about Democrats being woke and not caring about them, right? That trans ad they did, we are for you. They are, so they are for them, we are for you, right? Now, the Democrats never talked about woke at all. So again, they're going to need to confront this. The Democrats pretend like that ad didn't exist. They need to confront it the same way Gavin Newsom, not the same way, but the way Gavin Newsom is confronting Trump's insanity with his tweets and all that, right? By confronting it and by making fun of it or by exposing it, they've actually changed the way that Trump talks. He doesn't do those. So Trump no longer does all those, all caps. I haven't seen Trump do all caps, right? Since Gavin Newsom has been like mimicking on that. So it's obviously effective in that way. So yeah, again, it's just this madness of, I agree, Joe. We really need to defend woke. Actually, starting with the original definition from the 20s, when it was about black people being aware that they were more like, yeah, exactly, Rob. Yeah, yeah. I mean, defending it, but also defending woke, but also not saying that that is the number one issue for the Democrats. Yeah, like in the sense of like, when I say defend it, I mean like what you're saying, Rob, which is basically the mischaracterizing what woke is. What they do is they find the one or two really someone who says something on Twitter, right, who's like a woke person, and they'll find the most extreme person on the left, and then they'll paint that person as being the whole Democratic Party. They're very good at that, right? So, the Sydney Sweeney thing that happened the other time, I don't know what your views are. My views is it's like a nothing burger. There was nothing, I don't think there was anything that bad with the ad. Whether she's a Democrat or Republican or MAGA, it's just an ad, right? Saying she had good G's, play on words. I didn't think it was that bad. Now, there were a few people on the left who did get a little bit, was a small percentage. But what happened is that MAGA used those couple of people who said that right, about the Sydney Sweeney thing, and they tried to paint the whole the whole Democratic Party as being like, see, they're calling Sydney Sweeney a Nazi, right, over an ad, and that doesn't help Democrats, right? Mamdani focused on affordability at the same time, didn't throw anyone. Yeah, I agree, T. That's the thing. Like, you've got to find this balance, right, of not throwing people under the bus, right, but without letting people think, because the whole the whole thing about anti woke and Trump, the reason it won was not because people hate woke stuff or things like that. It's because they tied the Republicans and MAGA successfully tied woke to the economy. That's how they won that, right? It wasn't that ad that they did about trans people, right? Wasn't necessarily just anti-trans. It was an ad saying that Democrats are so focused on woke that they're not listening to you about the economy, right? That's why that ad was so successful. So that's that's the reason why, even though they said woke is dead once they won, they continue to talk about it every day because they think it's successful. And it is true to some degree, it is successful because um, if you if Democrats are cornered as being the people who only care about trans people in sports or this or that or woke people or that, that's not going to win elections because because most people don't vote on that. Most people vote on the economy. Democrats have to be first and foremost talking about the economy, like Zoran Mandami is, and you don't have to agree. This is the thing, right? When you have like Andrew Cuomo and all these people in the Democratic Party going after Zoran Mandami, it's like you can go after him, disagree on his policies, but the over the top thing where Andrew Cuomo is now kind of getting Trump's endorsement and all that stuff to try to beat him. That I don't understand. Like, that is the insanity, right? You could say, I'm just saying, if you're a centrist Democrat or a liberal Democrat who look at someone like Zoran Mandami and think he's too left, right? You can still criticize his policies, but to make it to side with Donald Trump over Zoran Mandami is insane, right? And again, it's also showing that some people in the Democrats still haven't learned their lessons from 2024, and that is they don't know how to use social media like Zoran Mandami is. They don't understand that cost of living is the number one thing. The reason Zoran Mandami, right, did so well in a lot of areas is because if you watch his TikTok videos, which I have seen a lot of, right, what he did is he comes across as authentic. How many that is like almost the number one thing these days, right? Authenticity, right? He on his TikTok videos, he went into Trump areas in New York, areas that voted overwhelmingly for Trump, and he asked them why they voted for Trump, right? And they said almost all of them in the video said, "Well, my rents were too expensive. I wanted to buy a home, but I couldn't buy a home. Um, it's so ridiculous that the entire Dem Party isn't totally embracing Mandami. He's about as much of a die-dyed in the wool charismatic caring America." Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And again, Rob, you don't have to agree with all his policies as well, because I think there is a lot of exaggeration, right, about what he's putting forward. Because I want to give you an example, right? Um, the grocery one, right? The grocery stores in New York, right? Now, um, I've looked at I've looked into the grocery thing because I'll be honest, I was skeptical about the grocery thing, and I'm still not 100% sure it's going to work. I'm but when I looked into what Zoran Mandani said about it, and then when I looked at to what's happened in other places like Texas and around the world, it wasn't as crazy as I thought it was going to be. Because I initially thought he was just going to put government-run supermarkets everywhere. But it's only in areas that are like desert areas where they don't have enough supermarkets, right? And this is something that to some degree had been done in America before, back in the 50s and 60s and 70s, right? They did have this sort of thing, right? And in other places around the world, they will have government subsidized areas because there's not enough people there to warrant a supermarket being open and then making a profit, right? So again, it's And the other thing that Zoran Mandami said about this is he said, we're going to trial it in 4 different places, right? So they're not just going to put them everywhere. We're going to trial them in 4. And he said this, he said, if it doesn't work, we're not going to do it, right? So from my point of view, as someone who I consider myself like a pragmatist, um, I think, well, just for food deserts where people don't have access. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And a lot of those food desert places, Rob, I was looking into, they have options for processed foods, right? But they don't have options for fresh food, like vegetables and things like that. So it's, so why should those people in those areas have to eat processed food from like a 7-Eleven or, some place like that, which is open, when they don't have access to like fresh vegetables? Um, so again, I don't know myself if it's going to work or the logistics of it or anything like that. But I've heard in some areas it's worked, and I've heard in other areas it hasn't. I've heard areas where they've put in like an air like a shop. I can't. Is it called like a dollar shop? I can't remember. There's like a dollar shop or something called in America, and they put it next to one of the places that they did a trial in, and basically it just crushed the grocery shop because eventually people just ate the processed food, and there wasn't enough people. So what they worked out, the people who looked at it, is that you can't have two different you can't have two supermarkets in a small area, right? Because there's not enough money for both of them to make a profit, right? So again, I'm open to the idea, as long as if it doesn't work, Zoran Mandami cancels it. It doesn't just go ahead with it just for because there's something popular to say. And from what I know, that's exactly what he wants to do. He's only wants to trial it. In terms of like, he's going to become like a communist and all this sort of stuff. Again, there's I think he made one comment about the Communist Manifesto or something Marx said or something when he was like 23 or 24, right? And then he says, so dollar stores are people's grocery stores. Yeah, yeah. So T, the dollar stores, are they mostly like from what I've heard, they're mostly processed food and not vegetables. That's what I've heard. But um but yeah, it's basically, so I guess what I'm saying is that even if he's not like he's not basically saying these are my policies and I'm gonna do them no matter what, right? So and for that reason, I don't understand this insanity about he's a communist, he's this and that. It just doesn't make any sense to me. You know, a lot of the stuff that he would say in New York, if he said that in Australia, right, or he said that in Europe, it would not be considered communist, right? I mean, to put it in perspective, I think Australia and Europe and Scandinavia are more to the left, right? They are processed foods here anyway. Yeah. Um, Canned and packaged stuff predominantly in dollar stores. Yeah, yeah, exactly. That's what I heard, Robin T. And it's mostly like it's not like fresh food, right? And but when they opened one of these trial grocery shops next to, and then they brought in one of the dollar stores, it basically, because there was two of them competing against each other, and one of them, a lot of people are attracted to processed food more. The place couldn't survive. It wouldn't be considered centrist. In fact, wouldn't it? Yeah. Look, the thing is, in Australia, we are more to the left. Now, to give you an example, right? And we're not like super left. We're not socialist or communist, right? Um, so, but we're more to the left, especially when it comes to things like healthcare, government homes, that sort of stuff. And we're certainly not perfect, right? But to give you an example, Barack Obama, who was probably like a centrist, right, in the Democratic Party, he could have been in my country. He could have been a moderate in the right wing party of our country. Dollar stores have smaller packages, so they are cheaper. Yeah. So, that's the thing. Like, and again, he wouldn't have been a far right wing person, Obama, in our country. He would have been like a moderate, like centrist, right? But he could have been a centrist in our, in fact, we had someone like him in Australia called Malcolm Turnbull. I don't know if you've heard of him. He recently went viral because he was in power when Trump was in power in the first term, and they had And Trump rang Malcolm Turnbull the first day and yelled at him, right? He basically berated our prime minister on his first day over some refugees or something. And anyway, they had a lot of arguments. And and Malcolm Turnbull, our previous prime minister, who was a conservative, but he was like a moderate conservative, he's like I would categorize him as socially progressive. So he actually brought in gay marriage in Australia. He's very progressive in socially, right? But economically conservative, right? So that was kind of his thing. Yeah. So um so it's similar in a way to Obama, I guess, in some ways, although I think Obama was against gay marriage at one stage and then sort of turned around. Um but yeah, I think from that point of view, um a lot of people in Australia are probably more to the left of that, and that's similar in Europe. And for that reason, if someone like Mandami was to come into politics in Australia, hi Carl, nice to see you again. Um, was coming to Australia again, that would be for me. It wouldn't. No one would be shocked. There wouldn't be people going, "Oh my God, there's this communist here." Seems from Trump, MAGA Republicans, frame most everything Democrat. Yeah, it is. Look, Dave from California, it's true. Like anything that the left does is considered, and Trump has kind of put this into the lexicon of like the American, conversation, which is like radical left, radical left, radical left, right? Um, but when Trump sent out $1,000 checks during COVID, right, it wasn't radical left, right? Um, and it so it seems in America, because the way it's been framed is that Trump could bring in more populist things, not that he does, and people wouldn't call it communism, as where if a Democrat does it, they're called communists, right? So it doesn't, they could bring in identical policies, sorry, on one particular issue, and one would be called a communist, and the other person would just be called like nothing, because the because who's going because nobody's going to call Trump a communist, right? So he can get away with more populism, right? So in a way, it's easier to be a right wing populist than it is to be a left wing populist in America, right? Because you're not tarnished with sort of, in some ways, you're rewarded as a right wing populist, and you're not rewarded as a left wing populist, right? Because you're from the right, you're not going to be called socialist, communist, that sort of thing. So even though Trump says populist things, he never really does populist things, right? But if someone from the left, right, wanted to bring in, for example, a public option, right, which for me, I wouldn't think a public option would be that extreme. It's not Medicare for all. It's just an option to go public, which is similar to what we have in Australia. In Australia, it's not really Medicare for all. In Australia, it's like you can go private or you can go on the government. You know what I mean? So it's kind of like it's a bit more complicated than that, but you have both options, right? And I think that's similar in Europe, and most European, Australian, Scandinavian governments, they don't really have Medicare for all, really, in the sense that America is like talking about it. It's more like a public option, things like that. So you still pay like a gap where, like, if you go to a doctor, you might have to pay a small amount, and the government subsidise the rest of it. You know what I mean? Depending on whether you're like a pensioner or all that sort of stuff. But again, I do think it's easier for and that's what I think, like, for someone like Zoran Mandami, we're seeing that now, where he's being um, sort of put down as, and not just, and again, it's not just Republicans, it's like centrist Democrats, and to me, they're over exaggerating, right? They're over exaggerating what he's like as a person, his policies. When he made that comment, the Marxist comment, I think he tweeted out like when he was 24, 25. Now, the interesting thing is that people on the right will often say, right, that we shouldn't judge someone by something they tweeted out 10 years ago or five, you know what I mean? Like in their past. That's cancel culture. That used to be cancel culture, right? It used to be that people like Joe Rogan or Republicans would say, well, what the Democrats do is they go through people's social media and they find something they said 10 years ago, and then we try to cancel them, right? Well, if that's your point of view, right, then something Zoran Mandami said 10 years ago or whatever shouldn't be something that we hold him accountable for now. And also the whole Israeli Palestinian thing, right? He's not he's not he's the mayor of New York, right? He's not going to be making, right? He's not going to be making policies on what's happening with Israel and that. So again, he has people like Bob Lander, who was one of the other people he ran with, who's Jewish. He has support from the Jewish community, certain parts of the Jewish community. I'm sure it's not all, but certain parts. Um, Again, this constant thing of trying to make him out to be someone he's not. And again, you can completely disagree with his policies, right? I don't think I think it's totally fair for someone who's a centrist Democrat to go, I don't believe in that. I don't believe in that. I don't think that's going to work. That's a legitimate thing to do, right? Completely legitimate thing to do. But it's not legitimate to call him a communist and to say that he's somehow this evil person, right? And then to side, right, with Donald Trump. That is not okay, right? Because basically what you're saying is that Zoran Mandami is so bad that Trump is a better option, right? I mean, come on, and there's no evidence for that at all, right? So again, you can disagree with his policies on Israel, right? You can disagree with his policies on the grocery shops and things like that, but they're not. They again, he's not the president of the United States, right? He's the mayor of New York. So whatever he thinks about Israel, Palestine, shouldn't be the number one reason why you're not voting for him. It should be based on cost of living and things that he can control, right? Things like like he was rents, freezing rents, all that sort of stuff. Now, I don't know if freezing rents is a great thing. I don't know, I've heard both sides of the story. I think if it's done correctly, it can work. I think if it's done incorrectly, it can actually have the opposite effect. Again, I'm not, but I'm saying is that it's legitimate to come in and have ideas, right? And then fight the ideas. Don't call that person a communist and things like that. And it also shows it shows me that some parts of it's not all. There are many people in the Democratic Party who did endorse him, right? They did endorse him. But it says to me that the Democratic Party still hasn't learned, right? It still hasn't learned from what happened in 2024, right? And that is that that cost of living is not the number one thing, right? You can't win an election in the United States, right, without addressing the cost of living, rent prices, home prices for young people, right? All these sort of things, you just can't. They're the main things that are going to win you election, right? It's not going to be. You're not going to win the election on woke. You're not going to win the election on even immigration, which can be an issue, right? Is generally tied to the economy. They'll say, "Oh, they're taking your jobs." The reason, all this, it's always tied to the economy, right? So everything always comes back to the economy, whether someone's going to win, not just in America, but Australia. Coral, lies get more shock value. Mandami don't understand the concept or won't. Value, Mandami don't understand. Yeah. But yeah, exactly. The thing is that getting attention these days is such an important thing to do. And I think that people like Zoran Mandami know how to do it. Trump knows how to do it. Gavin Newsom's or his team knows how to do it, right? And I think you can see that Democrats are learning this new landscape, this reality of it. And I get it. I've heard people on the left say, this is ridiculous. It's so childish. What do we have to go on TikTok and stuff? And I understand that from a macro point of view that, we have to get dirty with gerrymandering. We have to get dirty with, the tweeting out like Trump and all that. I totally get that. Rob, apparently you can just say you'll bring prices down. People will believe you and vote for you. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think, Rob, part of the reason why people believe that is that Trump was not the incumbent during last year. So anything that was happening last year or the year before, inflation, post-COVID inflation, was being blamed on Biden. The same way in Europe. So, Rob, this, and most people will know this already. There has never been a year like 2024 where incumbent governments got kicked out all around the world. There's never been in ever in the history of modern whatever. Yeah, in politics, right? So it was a very unique year. And the reason for that is Because as I said before, people don't pay attention to politics the way they used to, right? So they're only getting a little bit of politics in the peripherals, right? But they are paying attention to what their rent prices are, their home prices are, right? How much gas they're paying, the grocery prices. And they're paying attention to that all the time because they're having to deal with that every day, right? And so Trump is saying, I'm going to bring that down. And on the other hand, you have the Democrats who were running on Trump is an authoritarian, he's this and that. And, you know, at the time, I thought that was a good thing to run on, right? But it just shows that not enough people were listening to the everyday things that were happening, right? So they didn't see Trump doing all these authoritarian things. They knew Trump tried to overthrow the election, but even then, they tried to muddle the water. Trump is very good and MAGA at muddying the water. What they want to do is they want to say the Democrats are just as bad as we are, right? In terms of character, right? So things with like, for example, the documents case with Trump and Biden. Both of them took documents home that they shouldn't have taken home, right? Now, the detail of that is that only that when Biden found out he had documents, he returned the documents, he ran the archives, and he said, what can I do to make this better? So he did everything right, right? MAGA pretended they didn't have the documents, tried to hide the documents, and then tried to move the documents, right? So it was actually not taking the documents that was the crime, it was the obstruction, right? But if hi Marnie, nice to see you, Marnie. But that to me last year said to me that people aren't paying attention because I heard so many people, right? I heard so many people saying that 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 they're both as bad as each other, right? Trump took documents home, Biden took documents home. The problem is that people are not listening to the details, right? They're not listening to the bit about where one's obstructing and the other one's not obstructing, right? They're not hearing that. They're only hearing both doing it, right? So again, there's this constant muddying of the waters where Biden did this, Trump did that. They're both. It was the whole. They're both bad. All politicians are bad. They're both as bad as each other, right? Once that gets, if that becomes a big thing, then Trump doing what he does isn't as big an issue because it's like, yeah, Trump does that, but what about Dems? They do this, they do that, and they're not listening to the details, right? So it was a very good way. In my opinion, Trump's goal, even now, is not to make himself to be squeaky clean, right? And it's not to make the Democrats look bad, just bad. His goal is to take character off the table. His goal is to say, all politicians are bad. Yeah, I do stupid stuff. Like including, he's not saying this, but he's kind of implying, because whenever Trump gets accused of something, he will say, well, you didn't care when Joe Biden did that. Or, Joe Biden pardoned his son. Joe Biden pardoned all these people, right? So he will use all this to say, yeah, I pardoned January 6th, but he pardoned his son. There is enough there to muddy the waters that then people just go, they tune out and they go, well, they're all bad, right? And then so when Democrats or Kamala Harris are saying they're authoritarians, they're just going, well, they're not hearing the details, right? One of the biggest things that Trump did after January 6th was or during January 6th was the 7 slate fake electors. The fake elector scheme was one of the worst things he did. People always talk about January 6th, and it was bad. He definitely incited that, right? He definitely incited that. Just because you say peace once, but you spent 2 months before saying if you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country. Which is what he did. That's inciting violence, right? So he definitely incited violence. But what a lot of people don't talk about, and the reason they don't talk about it is because it's so insanely complex. And again, this is how Trump wins. People don't pay attention. It's too complex, right? The Jack Smith case, right? The fake elector scheme was absolutely trying to overthrow the government. You don't set up 7 fake electors in swing states, right? When the election is not that close, to literally come in and create a separate slate of electors. It was 100% foolproof that he was trying to overthrow the government, right? But most people don't talk about it because they don't know the details of it. And it is insanely complex, insanely complex. But and that's how and again, that's how it gets away with it, because people will just talk about January 6th and all that. And again, the documents case is another one. It's complicated to, when you go into the detail. The Jack Smith case is also complicated when you go into details. There's a RICO thing, right? Who's got time to look at all this stuff, right? Most people, you have a job, full-time job. You're not working in media, right? You're not working as a journalist. You've got kids. You don't have time to look at details of indictments, right? I mean, I do to some degree, but I'm spending a lot of time looking at it, and I'm thinking there's no way in hell the average American could be having this much time to do it. They just wouldn't do it, right? They couldn't do it. So that's how Trump got away with it. He got away with, complexities, the fact that the media is so fractured now, echo chambers in the media, all this sort of stuff. He just floods the zone so much. Yeah, exactly, Marnie. He does. Yeah. And then on top of that, right, Democrats do occasionally do bad things. So there's a little bit of truth to what he says, right? Because Democrats are not perfect. Nobody's saying they're perfect. So then, so even if so for example, I'll give you an example. I agree that Joe Biden should have pardoned his son. But I can also understand how in some way that did muddy the waters for Democrats to have the high ground in terms of pardoning. I can see that, right? From an objective point of view, if you're an average American who doesn't side with one side or the other, right, and you see him pardoning his own son, that takes away some of credibility, and it gives the other side enough there to go, sorry, you're criticizing me? So this is the thing, right? And Democrats the fake electors was never brought to the public because Jack Smith didn't get a chance to. Yeah, you're right, T. But it was the fake elector scheme was out there in public. Like, it was there in public. It just didn't go to court, right? It didn't make it to court, but all the evidence was already in public, right? There'd already been indictments. People had Merrick Garland waited too long. Yeah, exactly. 100% Dave from California. Yeah, he waited too long, and then it was over. Yeah, it was over. And the other thing is that Trump, I don't know how he did this, but Trump convinced everybody in 2024 that he was the outsider. And he convinced people that he was the outsider because he was showing up in court every day. And there was all these indictments against him, right? And, he was like, oh, they're trying to get me for this, they're trying to get me for that, they're trying to get me for this. And if you have a public who's not paying attention, and he's going around saying they're trying to prosecute me, they're trying to go after the opposition, some of that would have been definitely coming into some of the people who are not paying attention, right? They would have been thinking, actually, it does look like they're going after Trump, right? And then some Democrats I think it was, I can't remember the state, Colorado or some other state, were trying to stop Trump from being able to go on the ballot there, right? Again, that makes it look that, all right. So I didn't actually, to be honest, I didn't agree with that one. I thought that made Trump look better. You've got to pick your fights, right? You've got to pick your fights. And I think in one way, going after Trump had to happen, but on the other way, it did buy into his narrative, right? That he was the outsider, he was the martyr, he was being persecuted, right? It kind of bought into, he was able to get some Americans who are not interested in politics to buy into that there's all these people going after him, therefore maybe he's right. And then on top of that, you had the assassination attempt, which also turned him into a martyr, right? So you had all these different things, right, happening in 2024 that really went his way, right? Not saying assassination attempt, but I'm just saying, like, in terms of politics, it went his way, right? They were things that made him look like the martyr for people who don't pay attention to politics, right? And I think this has always been Trump's thing, how he managed to convince people in 4 years, right, he was this like, you know, because a lot of people after January 6th, they were like washing their hands of him, right? They were like, even Fox News, you know, people like J.D. Vance were calling him like, America's Hitler, all this sort of stuff, right? He had all these people against him in the Republican Party. And within 4 years, he managed to turn all that around, right? Convince people that he's now the outsider again, even though he was in there for 4 years, and that he was being persecuted, right? Um, so again, I think it's to me, it's like it's I don't know how he gets away with it. I think he gets. I mean, I kind of do. I think he gets away with it mostly um, because people are not paying attention. And when people aren't paying attention, you can get away with a lot of things. It's all about perception, right? It's all about vibes, right? It's all about, it's not, well, maybe there's something because they're not reading the details. Yeah. If you had a more informed country, right, who could get this information and you had a news media that was a little bit more that crossed over between both sides, um, then I think it would have been a different situation. Yeah. Um, but yeah, so again, doesn't speak highly of many Americans. Yeah. But look, I think I do believe um I do believe that Australia would be less gullible for that stuff. But I do think that we're definitely more gullible than we were before because we're suffering the same thing that you guys are or Europe is. And that is where people are not getting the same news from the same places. They're getting the news from different fraction areas. And there's so many people who are not paying attention to news at all. So how do you get convinced people, right? And every year that's getting worse. So if you look at the polling, every year less and less people are paying attention, right? So how do you get those people to vote, right? The uninformed voters are voting for conservatives, not just in America, but in England under Nigel Farage, who's like a far right wing guy, right? He didn't win, but he got a lot more votes than they thought he was going to win. Again, because the people in the UK don't follow politics as close as they used to, and they're getting all this news online about immigrants and they're taking over the country and the Muslims are attacking them and all this sort of stuff, right? So there is this online thing, right, where people are believing that they're sucked into this world online that things are happening that are not happening outside in the real world, right? So, so a lot of things like, immigration is killing the country or stuff like that. A lot of this stuff they're getting online, right? And so, and it's happening not just in America, but it's happening in Europe. It's even happened in Australia. We have like bipartisanship mostly, right? On immigration. So it's not a big issue here. But, and I find that if you look around the world, countries where immigration is not a big issue, right wing parties do not do very well. Immigration is definitely a thing that right wing parties use to get them ahead, right? So, in England, Nigel Farage's party used Muslim, but it is a combination of the economy and immigration. There's a lot of inflation in England, so they blame the Muslims, they blame the boat people, they blame all that, right? Same in France, same in Italy, all these different countries around the world. And that's the interesting thing. So how do we win hearts and minds? And I'm not talking about MAGA libertarians. Yeah. So I think the best way to win hearts and minds is you can't forget about the MAGA base. I think they're impossible to go, right? The only thing about the MAGA base that could be good is stop them from being enthusiastic enough to vote, right? They're not going to become Democrats, right? But I think the Epstein thing might actually make them less enthusiastic about Trump or even the person who replaces him. I think the way to get around it is the economy, right? Now, the tanking economy and price rising is the only thing that will make some of them stray away from here. If you still have free and fair elections by then, I'm not convinced there will be, sadly. Money, yeah. Yeah, I do think the economy is the only thing. I've said this, sorry for the people who've heard this 100 times before. My idea would be a big housing policy by the Democrats. And I don't mean like tinkering on the edges. I'm talking like massive housing policy. We're going to build homes everywhere. We're going to build so many homes, you're not going to believe it yet. And that's going to be the signature bill. Now, I have other ones like on healthcare or whatever, but the housing one would be the big one. The reason I think it's going to work, because in America, you have the electoral college system, right? And you've got all these Midwest states, right? And a lot of working class people live in those states, right? Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, right? And a lot of those people switched to Trump, right? Because he told them he was going to bring their jobs back from China. So if you need to get back, you need to get back, right? You need to get back working class people in the Midwest states, and you need to get young men back, right? People who generally voted Democrats. You get them back by a big housing thing. What does building homes do? More homes, right? It makes rents less because there's more supply, right? It makes it easier for young people, men and women, to buy a home because the more supply of home you have, the cheaper it is to buy. It won't go up as much. Thirdly, who builds homes? Working class people build homes, right? In Australia, we call them tradies, right? Plumbers, electricians, right? Builders, all that sort of stuff. The working class people build homes. I think that would draw the younger folk in particular. I think you're right, Joe, on the housing. Yeah, it brings everybody in. The people who built the homes are working class people, and probably a lot of young men build homes as well, right? And they're also they're also tradies, right? And it also helps everybody to have more homes, whether you're renting or whether you're a young couple trying to buy a home, or maybe you're a middle class, maybe you're a middle-aged person trying to buy a home. I know a lot of people and by the way, the housing thing isn't just a big thing in America, it's a big thing in Australia. And I really do believe that a big thing like that would overcome all the woke stuff, right? All the other stuff that MAGA will try to throw, no matter who's in power, right? Because ultimately, people will overlook that stuff if it's something they feel they can do. And if you're living in Pennsylvania or Wisconsin and things like that, and this and the Democrats coming in, we're going to build homes everywhere. You're going to have so many jobs building homes, and young people are going to be able to get the rent one. And MAGA come in and go, but there's that trans woman playing sports somewhere in Wisconsin. I don't think that's going to work. Yeah, I don't think that's going to work. Yeah, that's not going to be effective, right? Because the great reply to that would be to laugh at Republicans or whoever the MAGA candidate is. And that was to go, this is where I believe the Democrats could flip it. The Democrats need to flip the culture wars, right? And they flip it like this. They bring in a massive economic policy like homes, then maybe something for healthcare as well, but the big one is homes, right? And what they say is that if they try to do the whole anti-woke culture war things that MAGA love to do, because they think that's how they win. And also, it's not just how they win, it's how they win young men and working class people, right? And the way you fight that is by saying the truth. The truth is in 2024, Kamala Harris was not talking about woke. In fact, she ran away from woke so much she ended up in the hands of Liz Cheney, right? That's pretty unwoke, right? So you need to in 2028 they need to confront it. And they say, okay, wait a sec. We're offering this massive. So I would run ads like this. Here we are. Democrats are focused on. So remember, in 2024 is Democrats are focused on woke. That was their thing. Democrats are focused on woke. They're not focused on the economy. That was their ad, effective ad. In 2028, Republicans are focused on anti-woke. We're focused on you. We're focused on building homes. We're focused on making sure rents come down, home prices come down. We're focused on on builders, electricians, plumbers, all these carpenters, all these people having jobs building homes. And all MAGA and Republicans do is talk about woke. So you flip it. They need to flip the story because that's actually the true story. Yeah. And I think a lot of people will start to see Republicans for what they are. And that is that they're distorting the facts, right? They're distorting the truth. And if you win on the economy, you will win on the culture wars. I really believe that. Yeah. If you lose on the economy, you will lose on the culture wars. Yeah. Because people ultimately will vote for the economy. The amount of people who are going to vote, right? The amount of people who are going to vote on just culture wars is probably a 16-year-old who can't vote. a 16-year-old boy who's online gaming, right? He's a gamer, 15-year-old online gamer, right? Just playing Fortnite or whatever. And that's the guy, that's the kid who's obsessed with culture wars, right? Um, and he can't vote, or they're not, or they won't be bothered voting, right? Um, what they don't want to know, flip the script, 100% agree. Yeah. What they don't want to know, why it is effective, the culture wars, why the culture wars is effective, is not because of um, they're painting the Democrats as being too woke. It's effective because they're painting Democrats as not caring enough about people's economic lives, that they're too focused on what. That's how it's effective. We've got to understand the framework. Don't think if you're a Democrat that Republicans are coming after you and they're winning um, because all these people hate trans people and all these people. I'm sure there are some people who do that, right? But there's a lot of people who probably don't hate trans people who went, I'm going to vote for Trump because he's talking about bringing jobs back. He's talking about, even though we know he's lying, right? But he's saying this is Trump. We're going to bring jobs back, and they're painting the Democrats as talking about woke. That's that's how they win the culture wars. It's not the fact that they're winning the actual culture wars; they're winning the economic culture wars, right? That's how they do it, right? And so I think that's the big issue. They never won the culture wars, right? They never actually won just purely culture wars. They won the economic culture wars, and they will continue to win that if we don't confront that. And you can only confront that by bringing in an economic policy that is going to attract so many people. And unfortunately, in America, you have the electoral college vote, and you can't ignore the working class area. And not that you should ignore it, working class areas, but I'm saying you can't ignore Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. You can't. You just can't. You can't pretend to, right? And those people care about the economy more than they care about anything else, right? And that's basically it. So anyway, that's enough for me today. I probably went too long. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining me. I really had a great time. It was great. I noticed a few extra people here. Thank you so much for the love hearts. I got to say, I love the love hearts. It's one of my favorite things. I don't know much about the love hearts. I don't even know how you do it, but yeah, I really enjoy it. Thank you so much, everyone. If you haven't subscribed to me yet, thanks, Dave from California. Thanks, Coral. Thanks, Barney. Thanks, everyone. The usuals that usually come to me. Really appreciate it. And if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. Come onto my Substack, read my Substack, Joe Thomas newsletter. I'll try to do another one in a couple of weeks. Thanks a lot. See ya. See you, Marnie. See you, Coral.